They thought blood would silence her. They thought fear would break her. But when they destroyed her family, they forgot one thing. Revenge does not fade, it waits, and it grows darker with every heartbeat. The night smelled of smoke and iron. Flames licked the wooden beams of her home, shadows twisting against the walls as screams tore through the silence of the valley. Zamira crouched in the corner, clutching her little brother's hand, so tight his knuckles turned white. She could hear the men outside, their laughter, their boots crushing the soil, the sound of blades pulled from leather. Her father's voice had already gone silent. Her mother's last cry still echoed in her head, cut short by a sound she would never forget, the wet, final thud of steel through flesh. "Stay quiet," she whispered to her brother, but her own voice shook. She was only 17. Too young to fight, too old to hide. The door burst open. Channar Khan stepped inside. His shadow filled the doorway like a monster made of fire and rage. Broad shoulders, scarred face, eyes that burned with cruelty. He was the leader of the rival clan, the one who had sworn to erase Zamira's bloodline from existence. "Two more," he growled to the men behind him. "End them." Zamira's brother lunged at him, a child's desperate act of courage. Channar didn't even flinch. His sword flashed once, quick and merciless. The boy fell, eyes wide open, blood spreading across the dirt floor. Something inside Zamira cracked. Grief screamed through her chest, but her lips stayed pressed together. She wouldn't give Channar the pleasure of hearing her cry. He turned to her. His gaze lingered. Not with pity, not with mercy, just a cruel satisfaction. "Leave her," he ordered. "Let her carry the weight. Let her remember." And then he was gone. The men followed, their boots echoing, their laughter carried by the wind. Zamira crawled to her brother, shaking, her hands covered in his blood. Her family, her life, her world, all gone in a single night. She pressed her forehead against his cold skin and whispered, "I'll remember. And I'll make them remember too." Years passed, but the fire never left her. She was no longer the trembling girl hidden in a burning house. Zamira learned to hunt, to track, to fight with blade and poison. She wandered from village to village, gathering whispers about Channar Khan and his clan. Their crimes stretched far beyond her family. Children stolen, women enslaved, men butchered in the name of power. Every scar she carried, inside and out, became fuel. But revenge was not blind for her. It was patient, calculated. She wouldn't strike until she could end not just Channar, but the very foundation of his clan. Her chance came when the valley tribes gathered for a truce ceremony. A lie of peace, she knew, but one that brought every rival family into the same place. For the first time, Channar's defenses would be lowered. Zamira disguised herself as a servant. Her hair hidden, her face dirted, her posture bent low. She carried jugs of water, trays of food, never raising her eyes too high. But behind her lowered gaze, every detail burned into her memory. The guards' rotations, the weapons left by the gates, the arrogance of men who believed themselves untouchable. When night fell and wine loosened tongues, Zamira made her move. She slipped into the stables, where horses stomped restlessly. From her pouch, she pulled a small vial. A poison bitter as regret, silent as shadows. She poured it into the water troughs, where the horses would drink by dawn. A small start, but every victory begins with a cut. Then she moved to the tents, planting small pouches of oil-soaked cloth beneath the wooden poles. One spark would turn the camp into chaos. But as she crept through the darkness, she heard a voice, deep, commanding, unforgettable. Channar Khan. He sat by the largest fire, surrounded by his men, laughing at some cruel joke. His hand rested on the hilt of the same sword that had ended her brother's life. Zamira froze, her breath shallow. She could kill him now. A dagger to the back, quick and silent. Justice finished. But no, her mind sharpened like a blade. His death alone would not be enough. His clan would rise again. Revenge demanded more. She stepped back into the shadows, forcing her heart to still. Patience. Tonight was not about blood. It was about planting seeds. By dawn, the camp was chaos. Horses foamed at the mouth, thrashing in panic. Fires spread through tents, men shouted. Blades clashed as suspicion turned inward. Zamira watched from the hills, her lips curved into the smallest, coldest smile. This was only the beginning. For months, she struck in silence. Crops poisoned. Weapons stolen. Allies turned against one another with rumors she whispered into eager ears. Men vanished in the night, their bodies left hanging where the morning sun could shame their brothers. The clan began to fracture. Fear grew like rot. And Channar Khan raged. His pride, his power, his legacy, crumbling, piece by piece, to a ghost he could not catch. But Zamira knew the end was not yet. Not until he felt what she had felt. Not until he watched his bloodline fall. And so, she waited for the day his daughter was to be wed, a celebration that would gather every surviving member of his family in one place. The day arrived with drums and feasting. Banners fluttered against the blue sky, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and spiced wine. Laughter filled the courtyards, the arrogance of men who believed the worst had passed. Zamira walked among them, dressed in the bright colors of a distant clan, her face veiled. No one looked twice. To them, she was just another guest, another voice in the crowd. But in her chest, her heart beat like a war drum. Tonight, blood would answer blood. She slipped into the kitchens, where cauldrons bubbled and platters overflowed. From her hidden pouch, she drew the vial. A poison not to kill quickly, but to burn from the inside, slow and agonizing. She poured it into the wine meant for the high table, where Channar and his kin would sit. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with hunger. The moment was here. Years of waiting, of pain, of planning, all sharpening into this one act. But as she turned to leave, her eyes caught a small figure by the doorway. A child, no older than her brother had been, peeking into the kitchen with wide, curious eyes. Her chest tightened. For a moment, the air thickened, and the ghost of her brother's face flickered before her. She froze. Her dagger hung at her belt. The wine shimmered with death. And for the first time in years, doubt whispered in her ear. What will Zamira choose? The revenge she has built her life upon, or the faint echo of mercy that still lingers in her broken heart? Zamira's fingers grazed the vial, cold and trembling. The child blinked up at her, innocent, unaware of the world's cruelty. Her heart thudded, a sharp, confusing rhythm. She could not let this little one become collateral in a war she had waited years to wage. She stepped back, careful to keep her veil in place. The child giggled softly and ran down the corridor, disappearing into the laughter outside. Zamira exhaled, a mix of relief and frustration. Mercy had crept into her mind, a weakness she could not afford. Yet something shifted. A plan required precision, not reckless slaughter. By evening, the high table was set. Channar Khan arrived, tall and broad, with the arrogance of a man untouched by loss. His men laughed, trading boasts of past victories, while Zamira melted into the crowd, observing every movement. Every gesture was a clue, every glance a potential threat. She memorized it all. The feast began. Plates clattered, wine flowed, music swelled. Channar raised his goblet, toasting the prosperity of his clan, the survival of his lineage. Zamira's eyes followed him, the poison still secure in her pouch. The perfect strike would come later, after the seeds of chaos had grown, after his pride was weakened, after he had tasted the fear he inflicted on others. She wandered toward the servants' exit, blending in, overhearing whispers. "Did you see the northern tents? Some of our men are missing. Strange rumors are spreading." One guard frowned, uneasy. "It's nothing. Just stories." Stories. That was her weapon, too. A rumor whispered at the right time could undo decades of loyalty, turn brother against brother, father against son. Revenge was not only blood, it was fear, uncertainty, and patience. As night fell, the air cooled, shadows lengthened, and Zamira moved again. This time to the barracks where Channar's men rested, their arms heavy with sleep and drunken stupor. A few small fires flickered. A subtle smoke began to creep from the oil-soaked cloth she had planted in hidden corners. Soon, panic would spread as tents ignited. The chaos would divide attention, force men into the streets, and bring the clan into disarray. She paused by the largest tent, listening. Channar's voice drifted, loud and commanding, scolding a subordinate for carelessness. His confidence had not dimmed. Arrogance remained, untouched by the losses she had caused. Her lips curled slightly, cold satisfaction bubbling beneath the surface. She whispered under her breath, "Tonight, you will see what it feels like to lose everything." Then the fires began. Flames licked the edges of tents, crackling and flaring. Men screamed, rushed, fought. Zamira slipped back into the shadows, watching. The chaos unfolded like a symphony she had composed. Every scream, every stumble, every shout for help brought her closer to the justice she sought. But amid the fire and panic, she saw him, Channar Khan, calm in the center of the chaos, his expression shifting as he realized that the night had betrayed him. His men scrambled, confusion spreading like wildfire, and still, he stood tall, the epitome of a man who believed himself untouchable. For the first time, Zamira felt a flicker of doubt. Could she destroy him completely? Would the world forgive a daughter of blood for spilling more blood? But she pushed the thought aside. Justice was not forgiveness. Justice was balance restored, and she would have it. Weeks passed. The clan's strength waned. Rumors of betrayal and hidden attacks spread through the valleys. Channar Khan grew paranoid, sending men to scout constantly, isolating himself from even his closest allies. Zamira's careful strikes continued. Food poisoned here, water supply tainted there, trusted men vanished in the night. She began to leave small, subtle messages for him. Signs only he would understand, reminders that every action had consequences. Fear had begun to seep into him, the same fear he had sown in countless others. He could not rest. He could not sleep. He could not trust. And still she waited. The final act approached. Channar had arranged a festival, a display of his wealth and power, boasting of survival and supremacy. Every surviving member of the clan would be present. Zamira entered the festival, draped in the guise of a visiting merchant, blending in perfectly. She carried no weapons openly, only her intelligence, patience, and determination. Inside, children laughed, unaware of the hatred that simmered just beyond their reach. Men drank, boasting, while the fires of celebration burned. Zamira's eyes scanned the crowd, noting every weakness, every distracted guard, every point of vulnerability. She did not act rashly. She would strike only when the moment was perfect. As the sun set, the festival's energy peaked. Music swelled, dancers twirled, and Channar raised his goblet once again, a final toast to power and legacy. Zamira's hands tightened on her concealed vial, her pulse steady. The poison would not take lives instantly. It would shatter slowly, painfully, bringing fear, despair, and inevitability. But then, something unexpected happened. She saw the young girl, his daughter, laughing with her friends. Innocent, untouched by the cruelty around her. And for a moment, the image of her own lost brother surged in her chest. Could she condemn this child as punishment for a father's sins? Her fingers froze. Every plan, every calculation, every year of preparation. The knife of revenge hovered above the line between justice and cruelty. The fires of chaos outside were mirrored by the storm inside her. Could she complete the cycle of bloodshed, or would she find another way to end the lineage of hatred without destroying the innocent? Zamira stands at the edge of her vengeance, poised between completing her brutal revenge and sparing the innocent. Which choice will define her, and what cost will it demand? The music swelled as the festival reached its peak. Torches flared against the darkening sky, casting long shadows over smiling faces and gleaming weapons. Zamira's eyes never left Channar Khan. His arrogance still radiated from him like heat from a fire, but now a subtle tension laced his movements. He was cautious, sensing an invisible threat, though he did not know its source. She moved closer to the high table, disguised as a merchant's aide. Every step was calculated, measured, silent. The poison still lay in her pouch, a cruel promise waiting to spill. Her heart thudded, not from fear, but anticipation. Years of planning had led to this night. Every scar, every loss, every sleepless hour sharpened her resolve. But as she passed the children playing near the tents, she caught a glimpse of his daughter again. Bright eyes, laughing without care, a fragile reminder of what innocence looked like. A pang of hesitation pierced her. She had hated Channar Khan with all her being, and yet, here was a child untouched by cruelty. Could she condemn this girl to pay for the sins of her father? Zamira pressed her fingers into the pouch, feeling the smooth glass of the vial. She had the power to end an empire tonight. One careful pour, one subtle movement, and the poison would reach every drink on the high table. Justice would be served. Yet, mercy whispered in the corner of her mind. Could she find another way? The night grew colder. Guards stumbled in the drunken haze, some passing out near the fires, oblivious to the small disruptions Zamira had created. She had left subtle traps, small enough to be blamed on accidents, but enough to sow fear. Channar's men were already uneasy, glancing at one another, muttering about missing supplies and strange occurrences. The seeds of paranoia had taken root. Zamira slipped behind a tent, her eyes scanning for a vantage point. She needed precision. Timing was everything. The first drop of poison, the first fire spark, everything had to synchronize. She climbed a low wall, crouching just enough to see the high table without revealing herself. Channar Khan laughed, slapping the shoulder of a young man beside him. oblivious to the danger that crept closer with every heartbeat. Zamira's pulse matched the rhythm of his laughter. She exhaled slowly, focusing, preparing for the final act. Then she saw a movement out of the corner of her eye, a figure she had not anticipated. A young guard, curious and suspicious, moved closer to the kitchens, sniffing out the source of earlier disturbances. If he discovered her, the plan would collapse. Zamira tensed, deciding in a heartbeat. She could neutralize him quietly, but another innocent life risked becoming collateral. Her hand hovered over the dagger hidden beneath her cloak. The world seemed to hold its breath. The guard paused, glanced around, and muttered something under his breath before retreating. Relief washed over her, but only briefly. There was no time for hesitation now. The moment arrived. Channar lifted his goblet to the sky, a toast to his survival and dominion. Zamira's fingers touched the vial. One subtle tilt, one careful pour, and the poison would flow through the wine, touching every mouth at the high table. She imagined the look on his face, the slow dawning horror, the fear that would finally pierce his arrogance. But then she paused. She saw his daughter again, innocent, bright, unaware. And suddenly, the years of rage collided with her conscience. Could she allow vengeance to blind her to humanity? Could justice demand the destruction of someone untouched by cruelty? Her heart thundered. She made a decision. The poison remained in her pouch. Tonight, she would act differently. She would dismantle his power, yes, but not at the cost of an innocent life. Instead, she would expose him. She would strip away the empire of fear he had built, using strategy and cunning rather than indiscriminate bloodshed. Zamira descended from her hiding spot, moving among the guests with quiet purpose. She whispered warnings to the men she had quietly turned against Channar, subtly guiding their paranoia. Small fires broke out, stolen weapons were revealed, and rumors she had planted weeks ago blossomed into arguments and accusations. The high table grew chaotic. Channar's eyes widened as he tried to maintain control, his voice rising over the din, commanding loyalty that no longer existed. The guests began to turn against him. Allies withdrew, convinced of betrayal. Zamira watched, her lips pressed into a thin line. Justice was coming, not through blind rage, but through the unraveling of every thread he had relied upon. Channar's face darkened with fury. He realized that his power was crumbling. The fires, the rumors, the disloyalty, it was all orchestrated, invisible yet undeniable. He could strike, he could scream, he could demand obedience, but no force could save him from the collapse of his own making. Zamira approached him at last. Cloaked and unassuming, she stood in his presence, eyes unwavering. "This is the end, Channar Khan," she said softly, voice steady. "Your empire of fear is finished. The blood you spilled will not be forgotten, but it will not claim the innocent in its wake." Channar laughed, bitter and incredulous. "You, a child, what power do you have?" She smiled, cold and sharp. "Power comes not from swords, but from patience, from knowledge, from knowing every weakness. You taught me that. You taught me cruelty. But I have learned something you never understood. Mercy can be stronger than fear." And then, just like that, the final act began. Guards loyal to her whispered accusations, revealing hidden crimes, uncovering corruption, and igniting distrust that Channar could not extinguish. Men turned against him, his own advisors plotting escape, and the once mighty leader found himself surrounded by the ruins of the empire he had built with blood. Channar Khan fell to his knees, rage and disbelief contorting his face. Zamira stood above him, unwavering. "This is the end of your legacy," she said. "The last bloodline does not die with vengeance, it survives with justice." He looked up, eyes burning with hate, and in that moment, Zamira understood the full weight of her journey. She had lost so much, yet she had spared the innocent. She had avenged her family, but she had not become the monster he had created. The valley grew quiet. Fires still burned in the distance, but the people around the high table now understood the shift. Justice had prevailed. Fear remained, but it was tempered with hope. Zamira turned away, knowing the war was over. Not all wounds healed, not all scars faded, but the cycle of blood had been broken. And somewhere in the stillness, she whispered to the sky, "We are the last bloodline. But we survive." Channar Khan's empire lies in ruins, but will the remnants of his clan accept justice, or will another generation rise to continue the cycle of violence? The morning after the festival, the valley was quiet but tense. The fires from the night still smoldered, sending thin spirals of smoke into the sky. Villagers peered cautiously from behind doors, whispers filling the streets. Channar Khan's once mighty presence had crumbled overnight, but his shadow still loomed. Zamira moved through the alleys with purpose, blending with the early morning mist. Her cloak hid her face, her eyes scanned every corner. She had dismantled his power publicly, but remnants of the clan still existed, loyal to the cruelty that had ruled for generations. One mistake, one misstep, and the cycle could begin again. She reached the edge of the valley, where the terrain fell sharply into ravines and cliffs. Here, she had learned to hunt, to survive, to think like a predator and a strategist all at once. Every step she took reminded her of the night she had lost everything, of the screams, of the blood staining the floor of her home. That memory fueled her resolve. Channar Khan, now stripped of authority, was holed up in the largest tent, guarded by only a handful of loyal men. He refused to leave, insisting he would reclaim his power, but his empire had already crumbled. Fear had infiltrated his mind, paranoia consuming every thought. He paced the tent, muttering threats, dragging his daughter behind him, fearful she might betray him without knowing why. Zamira knew she had to act carefully. The final confrontation would not be a battle of brute force. It would be a test of wit, patience, and timing. She could strike, but she had to ensure that no innocent blood would stain her hands. Justice was the ultimate goal, not cruelty. As she approached the tent under the cover of trees, she whispered to herself, "It ends tonight." The last bloodline survives, not through fear but through courage. Inside, Channar Khan was frantic. "Where are they?" he barked at his remaining men. "Find her. I don't care what it takes." But his commands fell flat. The men hesitated, uncertain who to follow. Rumors and distrust had eroded loyalty faster than any blade could. Zamira slipped silently into the shadows, watching him crumble. The poison, the fires, the rumors, they had done their work. He was alone in his fear, surrounded by walls that once symbolized strength, but now trapped him in his own hubris. She stepped into the tent, removing her cloak. Her eyes met his. For a moment, neither spoke. Channar Khan's expression was a mix of shock, fury, and disbelief. You are just a girl," he spat, but there was a tremor in his voice. "I am what your cruelty made me," Zamira said softly. "I am the reckoning. I am the last bloodline." He lunged at her, rage fueling his movements, but Zamira was ready. She dodged swiftly, her dagger flashing in the dim light. Every strike she made was precise, aimed not to kill unnecessarily, but to disable. She had no desire to become the monster he had been. The fight was brief but intense. Channar stumbled, the walls around him echoing with his own fear. His men tried to intervene, but Zamira had already planted the seeds of mistrust. Some hesitated, others turned on him, unsure where their loyalties truly lay. Finally, she stood over him, dagger at his throat. "It ends here," she said, calm and unwavering. "You will live to see the consequences of your actions. You will watch your empire fall and never rise again." Channar Khan's eyes widened, the fire in them dimming. He realized his power was gone, and with it, the fear he had cultivated. He nodded reluctantly, knowing escape was impossible and that survival now meant submission. Zamira stepped back, lowering the dagger. She turned to leave the tent, her mind heavy with the weight of justice and mercy intertwined. Outside, villagers and survivors began to emerge, witnessing the collapse of tyranny. Whispers of hope and resilience spread through the valley. Yet, she knew the lesson must reach beyond the valley. Power used cruelly always falls, but mercy tempered with justice creates strength that endures. She had avenged her family, dismantled a legacy of violence, and preserved the innocent. The cycle was broken, not by blood alone, but by wisdom and restraint. Weeks later, the valley had begun to heal. Crops were replanted, homes rebuilt, and the surviving members of Channar Khan's clan lived under watchful eyes, learning humility the hard way. Zamira walked among them, no longer just a shadow, but a presence, a reminder that justice could be both fierce and fair. The child she had spared grew curious, asking questions about the past. Zamira smiled, patient and silent, knowing some lessons needed to unfold with time. Her own scars remained, but she carried them not as chains, but as markers of strength and survival. In the quiet moments, she would sometimes sit by the cliff's edge, looking over the valley. The wind carried memories, both bitter and sweet. She whispered to the sky, "The last bloodline survives, not for revenge alone, but for justice, mercy, and the chance to rebuild." And somewhere in the shadows, the remnants of Channar Khan's pride stirred, a reminder that vigilance was eternal, and that even the strongest empires could fall to patient resolve. Even with Channar Khan defeated, will the remaining members of his clan attempt to reclaim power, or will they learn the true meaning of justice Zamira has enforced? The weeks that followed were tense. Channar Khan's clan had fractured, but old habits die slowly. Small groups moved through the valley, testing boundaries, looking for weakness. Zamira watched from the hills, silent and calculating. Every move they made was a lesson, every hesitation an opportunity. She had become more than a survivor. She was a strategist, a shadow in the valley, the embodiment of both patience and wrath. People whispered about her, calling her the last bloodline, a figure both feared and respected. Mothers warned their children, and even hardened men kept their distance. Her reputation was a weapon in itself. One evening, news reached her that a faction of Channar's remaining men had gathered near the northern cliffs. They planned to attack the villagers, reclaim power, and avenge their fallen leader. Zamira knew she could not allow it. The cycle could not continue. She moved swiftly, gathering a few loyal allies she had gained over the months. Together, they set a trap, using the terrain and knowledge of the valley to their advantage. Every path was planned, every position calculated. Revenge was no longer personal. It was protective, ensuring no one else would suffer as she had. The attackers came under the cover of darkness, confident, arrogant, thinking they could surprise her. But the valley itself seemed to betray them. Narrow paths, hidden pitfalls, and unexpected ambushes scattered the group. Fear took hold quickly, the same fear Channar Khan had once wielded as a weapon. Zamira confronted the leader of the faction, a man named Rafiq, under the pale moonlight. His sword glinted, but his movements were uncertain. She didn't strike immediately. Instead, she spoke, her voice calm yet commanding. "This is your last chance," she said. "Turn back or face the consequences. Your war is over. Your leader is gone. Your power is gone. Only you can choose to end this cycle." Rafiq hesitated, glancing at his men. Confusion and fear spread through their ranks. Some dropped their weapons, realizing the futility of the attack. Others turned to flee. Zamira's eyes scanned the remaining few, calculating her next move. A fight erupted with the stubborn ones, quick and decisive. Zamira moved with precision, disabling, not killing, leaving the lesson clear. Strength comes from intelligence and courage, not cruelty. By dawn, the northern cliffs were quiet. The remaining factions scattered, broken and humbled. Zamira returned to the valley, exhausted but resolute. She had dismantled the threat completely, not with blind rage, but with strategy and restraint. The villagers welcomed her silently, their eyes filled with gratitude and respect. She had become a symbol of justice that did not demand cruelty in return. Days later, she visited the ruins of her childhood home. The land was scarred, but flowers had begun to sprout among the ashes. She knelt, touching the earth where her brother had fallen. "We have survived," she whispered, tears brimming. "We are the last bloodline, and we will thrive, not just survive." She stood and looked toward the horizon, the valley stretching beneath her. The sun rose, casting golden light over the mountains. The past would never be forgotten, but the future was hers to shape. Mercy, justice, and vigilance would guide the valley now, ensuring that fear could not dominate again. And then she remembered Channar Khan. He lived, humiliated, stripped of power, forced to witness the consequences of his actions every day. Her revenge was complete, not through killing alone, but through the dismantling of his legacy and the protection of those who were innocent. The lesson was clear: cruelty and power may destroy, but patience, intelligence, and moral clarity can restore balance without perpetuating suffering. Zamira had become more than a survivor. She had become a guardian of the valley, the embodiment of the last bloodline. Channar Khan survives in disgrace, but will he ever find redemption, or will the shadow of his crimes haunt the valley forever? Zamira's final challenge is not bloodshed, but ensuring history does not repeat itself. Months passed, and the valley slowly healed. Crops grew where fires had burned, and homes were rebuilt with timber and stone, stronger than before. Villagers worked together, cautious but hopeful, no longer living in the shadow of Channar Khan's cruelty. Zamira walked among them, a quiet presence. She no longer hid in shadows. Her name carried respect, not fear. Children peered at her with curiosity, mothers offered silent gratitude, and the men who had once served Channar now approached her cautiously, understanding that justice had shifted hands. Yet, even in this calm, Zamira could not rest. Channar Khan lived nearby, forced into a solitary exile by the collapse of his clan. He survived only because she had chosen restraint, so the lesson could burn into his soul, not his body. Every day he saw what remained, what was left of the empire he had tried to dominate. The last bloodline had survived, not just through vengeance, but through mercy and strategy. One evening, Zamira approached the outskirts of his hiding place. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke from his meager fire. She stepped into the clearing, dagger concealed but ready, not for attack, but as a reminder of the power she still held. Channar rose as she appeared, his face pale, haunted, eyes darting with unease. "Why are you here?" he demanded, his voice brittle. "I am here to remind you," Zamira said softly, "that cruelty has consequences. You are alive, but your power, your legacy, your fear, they are gone. You live to see the result of your choices." He swallowed hard, realizing that the world he had built with blood and terror had crumbled entirely. There was no army to rally, no allies to trust, no respect remaining. Only the constant reminder of every innocent life he had harmed. Zamira continued, her voice steady. "You will live, Channar Khan, to see the pain your actions caused. You will live to witness the people you terrorized rebuild. And every day, you will understand that your cruelty achieved nothing but your own downfall." For the first time, he seemed to understand. Fear, once his weapon, now became his punishment. His arrogance had blinded him to the power of mercy combined with justice, a power far stronger than brute force. She turned to leave, but paused. "Remember this, Channar. True strength is not measured by the blood you spill, but by the lives you protect. Let this be the lesson you carry to the grave, for your shadow will linger, but the light of those you harmed will endure." The next morning, Zamira returned to the valley proper. The people greeted her with smiles now free of fear, their eyes reflecting trust and gratitude. Children ran past, playing among fields that once held only ashes. Mothers worked alongside each other, rebuilding homes stronger than before. Men shared labor and laughter, no longer shackled by fear. Zamira watched them, silent, reflecting on her journey. She had avenged her family, dismantled Channar Khan's tyranny, and preserved the innocent. The cycle of violence had been broken, not through endless bloodshed, but through patience, intelligence, and moral clarity. She had become more than a survivor. She had become the guardian of the valley, the embodiment of the last bloodline. Yet the twist lay in the quiet shadows, the hidden truths that no one expected. Channar Khan, though alive and humbled, was secretly plotting, not for revenge, but for redemption. In the solitude of his exile, he began to rebuild himself in a way Zamira had never anticipated. He learned humility, understood mercy, and began to secretly help those his clan had harmed. The valley never knew. Villagers never witnessed it. But Zamira, walking along the cliffs one evening, sensed it in the wind, the faint but undeniable shift of a man forced to confront his own legacy. Justice had not only punished, but had created the possibility for transformation, even in a villain. And so the final lesson was revealed. Revenge is not just about blood. It is about balance, awareness, and moral reckoning. The last bloodline survived not because Zamira had killed every enemy, but because she understood the power of patience, restraint, and justice tempered with mercy. In the valley, life thrived. The survivors rebuilt stronger, wiser, and cautious, yet free from fear. Zamira, scarred but resolute, walked along the cliffs, the wind carrying her whispered vow. "We are the last bloodline. We endure. And through wisdom, courage, and justice we will rise, not through fear, but through life, hope, and the choices that define us." The sun set over the mountains, golden light spilling across the valley. Shadows faded, and the people of the valley understood, without words, that the age of terror had ended. Even Channar Khan, living in the shadows of his mistakes, had learned a truth he could never unsee. Cruelty may build empires, but only justice, tempered with mercy, preserves legacies. The last bloodline endured, not because it sought vengeance, but because it understood the true power of balance between wrath and mercy. And in that moment, the valley knew peace, not the fragile peace of silence under fear, but the enduring peace of lives restored and lessons learned. Channar Khan survives, but powerless and forced to confront his cruelty. Zamira's revenge is complete, but she spares innocent life, showing restraint. The subtle moral: true justice is not blind revenge. It is the careful balance of retribution, mercy, and protection of the innocent.